morning, everyone.
Morning.
And thank you all for coming. Now that the video has been released, it confirms what we've been saying to you all along. John Crawford did nothing wrong. John Crawford did not commit a crime. John Crawford posed no immediate threat to anyone or the officers. John Crawford was shot for no reason and without justification. The family is shocked and in disbelief that Officer Sean Williams was not indicted for the unjust killing of John Crawford. It's truly a sad day in Ohio and in America when a 22-year-old unarmed man was killed without justification while shopping in Walmart. The Crawford family is disappointed that this case was not originally given to the U.S. Attorney and the Department of Justice. The Crawford family wanted this investigation to be done by the U.S. Department of Justice because they feared and believed that Attorney General Mike DeWine and the Special Prosecutor Mark Piedmeier would not vigorously pursue charges against this officer. The actions of Attorney General Mike DeWine and Special Prosecutor Piedmeier demonstrated prior, during, and after the grand jury proceedings that they clearly had a bias towards these officers. Attorney DeWine refused to recuse himself and give this case to the U.S. Attorney, even though he had a clear conflict of interest. Special Prosecutor Piedmeier demonstrated this continual conflict of interest and obvious bias when he gave a press conference yesterday where he justified the actions of the officers. Special Prosecutor Piedmeier's press conference shows clearly that he presented this case like he was defending the officers rather than prosecuting on behalf of this family. Rather than advocate for the constitutional rights of John Crawford, Attorney DeWine and Piedmeier made excuses for these officers' actions and stated the officers' actions were reasonable. This was not Columbine. This was not Sandy Hook. It's insulting to this family that Piedmeier mentioned that Mr. Crawford in those same sentences. He was not an active shooter. He was only a kid shopping at Walmart. The family is insulted by that. I'm going to introduce Attorney Sean Williams from the Cochran Firm, and he's going to discuss the video.
Good morning, everyone. First thing I want to get clear is my name is Attorney Sean Williams. I'm no relation or affiliation with the officer who unjustifiably killed John Crawford. My name is spelled S-H-E-N. Second thing I want to make sure that everyone is clear about, I want to dispel what the prosecutor said yesterday. He said these officers' actions were justified. That is just adamantly and completely wrong. It is wrong because the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution and the U.S. Supreme Court has decided that an officer's actions must be reasonable to use deadly force. He's wrong because the U.S. Constitution and the U.S. Supreme Court said that an officer can only use deadly force when a person poses an imminent threat to the officer or to others. As we saw in that video, that did not happen. There was no threat to any officer or anyone in that store based upon John Crawford's actions. So to say and to give a press conference for over 20 minutes to justify the actions of this officer was insulting, particularly from a prosecutor whose job was to be an advocate for the victim. And the victim here, be very clear, was John Crawford. It is never reasonable or justifiable to shoot a man who posed no threat to anyone. in Ohio, and any part of America. It's never reasonable or justifiable to shoot a man while his back is turned or to the side. Not in Ohio or any place in America. It's never reasonable to shoot a man without adequate warning. The Walmart video itself proved that the shooting of John Crawford was not justified and was not reasonable. And just the proof of that is throughout the whole video. But we're going to just show a clip to establish and show. The same way Mr. Prosecutor did yesterday, one thing he forgot to mention is, show the video for us, bro. There's nothing about what Mr. Crawford is doing before he's shot that justifies imminent harm or threat to anyone. The gun barrel is down. He's talking on a cell phone. But then he's shot. He's shot without justification, without warning. There is no threat to Officer Williams. There's no threat to anyone else. And to have a press conference and to tell this family and this community that this was okay is a problem. Not only are we aware of the video, Walmart video, but we know, in fact, that there's eyewitnesses to support that Mr. Crawford did not have a chance. The last thing that I want to speak regarding the press conference yesterday that was given by the special prosecutor, he used a bad choice of word in describing this as a perfect storm. There's nothing perfect storm about what happened. This is a horrible tragedy and a nightmare for this family. And this tragedy only happened because officers decided to violate the constitutional rights of Mr. Crawford on that day.
The next steps. This is not the end. This is just the beginning of this fight for this family. Although we are disappointed, we are not defeated. We will continue to fight for justice for John Crawford III. Our fight for justice will begin by continuing to ask the U.S. Attorney's Office to conduct a thorough investigation into this shooting and whether or not John Crawford's constitutional rights were violated. Our fight for justice will continue with us asking the Beaver Creek Police Department and the Bureau of Criminal Investigations to provide us with their complete investigation file so we can consider all legal options on behalf of this family. Again, we ask for the community to continue to support this family and pray for the Crawford family and also for the family of Angela Williams. And we'll take questions.
Good morning, everyone. I just would like to really just say that the family and I are shocked and disbelief that a young man could go inside of a store and be a patron and not come out alive. What was really ironic in the presentation of prosecutor, Mr. Mark Pittmeyer, is that at the conclusion of the orientation, he himself said that John Crawford did not commit a crime. That John Crawford did nothing wrong. That's exactly what he said. So if that is the case, then why is he not here? That's a fundamental question I have. If he did nothing wrong, if he did not commit a crime, then why is he not here with us? I really have nothing further. I'm really at a loss of words because frankly, I'm appalled.
And you are, your name, sir, is what? I'm sorry.
My name is John H. Crawford Jr. I am the father of John H. Crawford III.
Mr. Crawford, or Michael, would you speak to your observations, if you would, about how long you think police need to evaluate a situation such as they found when they went into this?
Well, as you can see from the video, there was no evaluation. So they need to evaluate it longer than it took them to just come in and shoot and kill John Crawford on sight.
Let me say this. Obviously, there was no protocol followed. We said that from day one. This was confirmation that there was absolutely no protocol. It was breached. You know, the officer went in and virtually shot him on sight. He did not have a chance. You know. So, time-wise, sir, not sure. But what we do know is that it's not his impulsivity caused my son not to be here right now. There was clearly not an abidance by protocol.
Is there was there any audit?
Right, Mr. Piedmeier said yesterday that protocol for police, period, has changed since Columbine in reference to, in my layperson's language, not waiting for backup, not waiting, you know, just going in and taking care of what appears to be an active shooter.
I'll speak to that. Rick Schulte and Mike Wright's partner. Those officers have a duty to evaluate other action they can take before they use lethal force. There was no evaluation here. He had no opportunity to do anything. If a second went by, that was a long time in that videotape, and everybody can see it. The public needs to ask themselves, at what point does this officer's conduct become unreasonable? Okay? What the grand jury and Mr. Piedmeier and the Attorney General have said to the public is that at no point is this officer's conduct unreasonable. That they can make a decision subjectively to use lethal force if they have any perceived threat. And in this case, there was no threat. At what point is their actions unreasonable? You need to ask yourself that.
Was there any audio with that tape?
The tape did not have audio.
So didn't the police say that they told Mr. Crawford to put the weapon down?
If they told Mr. Crawford to put the weapon down, you can see from the video that he did not acknowledge it. Right. He did not hear them, and if they did tell him that, he did not have enough time to even comprehend and respond to that command.
So there's no proof that the police even said that.
That's exactly right.
There's no proof that they said that, and frankly, it's irrelevant. He was never given an opportunity to do anything. They shot him on sight.
I guess the perceived threat from listening to what was said yesterday traces back to the 911 call. And so, if you're a police officer going into the store, armed with information that someone has called 911 and said someone's aiming a gun at someone, pointing a gun at children, that's your mindset going in. What is it that we want from police at that point?
We want police officers to follow the Constitution. And the Constitution says you make decisions reasonably, and you make decisions in a way that you do not use deadly force unless there's a imminent harm to yourself or someone else. Now let's talk about the 911 call. As a police officer, and if there was experts that, I'm confident there was experts to talk about appropriate use of force for police officers presented to the grand jury, I'm quite sure the experts would have told them that notwithstanding the 911 call, you have to evaluate the situation independent yourself. 911 calls are not always accurate, and witnesses' accounts, as we always know, are not always true. So as a police officer, you still have the #1 duty set by the Constitution to make sure that your actions are reasonable and that you make sure you only use deadly force when it's allowed by the law. So I bring up the expert for this reason. Attorney DeWine gave a press conference and told you guys that he had hired expert witnesses to review the appropriate use of force in this case. I didn't see anything that the special prosecutor talked about yesterday regarding the expert use of force. We have, as a firm, handled several police shooting cases across this nation. And I am very confident if you ask any reasonable expert on this issue, they will tell you that there was not adequate time, that there was not reasonable actions taken by the officers, and there was no immediate harm or threat to anyone.
Mr. Wright, I noticed in the beginning of this unfortunate situation that Mr. Crawford's situation had been connected to the shootings and injuries, fatal injuries of other black men across the country. I did notice today there was a marked difference in your speech when you said an unarmed man. You are no longer considering race an issue here?
It was an unarmed black man that got shot and killed in Walmart. And we can't hide from that. We believe that, yes, had Mr. Crawford been Caucasian, maybe the outcome would be different. But it's very hard at this point to say that that, in fact, was the case, would have been the case.
So you are discounting that part of this situation now?
No, we're not. We're
human
not.
being, you're saying now a human being rather than a black man.
Let us be clear, and I think Mike just said it perfectly. He's a young man. He's a man first. He's a black man who is a U.S. citizen and is afforded the same rights that every American is afforded. Now, whether or not the police officer's actions were related to him being an African American man, that we're going to let people and a jury, and hopefully a grand jury that preceded it by the U.S. Attorney's Office decide that. But I tell you this, whether he was a black man, a white man, old or young, he's afforded the same rights that every person in America is afforded. And he should not have been shot, period. There's no justification one way or the other. So we don't discount it. But the reality of it is the officer's actions should have been the same regardless of the color of his skin. Period. The same.
Yesterday, Attorney General had said that at this point now the Department of Justice will review that. The feds will now review this case. What was your reaction to hearing that the federal government will now take a look at this entire scenario?
We've been telling Mike DeWine this since August the 7th, that the U.S. Attorney should have been involved. It did not have to come to a non-indictment in Beaver Creek in Greene County for the U.S. Attorney's Office to get involved. We knew that this was a likely outcome based on our meeting with Mike DeWine, based on our meeting with Special Prosecutor Pete Meyer. We knew that this was the probable outcome based on how they handled this entire investigation and prosecution of these officers.
You mentioned yesterday that there was no attempt, in your statement you said there was no attempt by Mr. Pete Meyer or anybody, the other special prosecutor, to try to get an indictment. Is that what a grand jury is for, is to try to get an indictment or to present evidence and let the grand jury make up its mind?
Did you watch the video?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I wasn't in that grand jury room either, sir.
There should, from our perspective, the grand jury should have came back with an indictment, from our perspective. However, we don't know what evidence was presented to the grand jury. What's interesting is that the grand jury proceedings are supposed to be confidential, but Pete Meyer came out and gave all type of evidence yesterday that was presented to the grand jury. So we don't believe that that was proper.
But you had asked for the release of the video for some time, and he released the video.
But he released it after the fact, first of all. And secondly, we do believe the evidence was presented biased just by how he did the press conference yesterday. He did a closing argument like he was the defense lawyer for the officer. With all due respect, that's one thing I know is not the job of a special prosecutor. He is over there citing to training materials that have no relevance to the issues in this case. Mr. Crawford wasn't an active shooter, period. So to answer your question, the reason we believe he was biased and to these officers was his own words and actions yesterday. He specifically said, and I quote, the officers' actions were justified. He's not in a position, or should be in a position, to be making that comment if he is being given the role of special prosecutor. So our bias and our belief in his bias is based on his own statements after the fact and how DeWine has handled this case from the beginning.
And we're also concerned. Mr. DeWine said he had a conflict. He oversees the BCI folks. They're the ones that did this investigation. We believe he was involved in every step of this investigation and did not recuse himself properly. The federal government should have been involved in this case, and they weren't. And we have concerns about his relationship with Mr. Piedmeyer because of the obvious bias he's had in defending these police officers.
Mr. Williams, I wanted to ask you about what you said about not an active shooter. Police went in with the mindset of a potential active shooter, right? There was no shot fired prior to police coming in. So talk to us, if you would, about the difference between active shooter and potential active shooter as it pertains to this.
Well, two things on that. The reason I brought up the active shooter is not because I was making it a relevant issue in this case. The person who made that an issue was the special prosecutor when he showed slides of a training that, by the way, if you look at the press conference, the training has on it Attorney DeWine training. The own policies he's citing is from the same Attorney General. It's a clear conflict. So the active shooter issue came up because the special prosecutor brought it up and started talking about Columbine. This was not a Columbine situation. So to answer your question, I would need to see the whole policy and procedure. But the policies he showed on that slide during the press conference has no relevance to this issue. This issue was a gentleman in the store as a customer, no threat. When that officer came around that corner, he had to evaluate the threat and use reasonable action. There's no evidence that that policy that he cited yesterday should have ever been used or relied upon, or if it was presented to the grand jury, should have never been presented to the grand jury.
But to your point about evaluation, you're saying when you say active shooter, it's potential active shooter because the police do not have any knowledge that there's been any shots fired in Walmart at the time they entered, right?
Mr. Crawford was not an active shooter. So to use a policy and procedure either before, during, or at a press conference after a lack of indictment is improper, period. So I don't know how to answer your question, but to tell you it has no relevance in this issue. And the reason it was only brought up by me is because the prosecutor made an attempt in trying to prove to the community that these officers' actions were justified. And I was just pointing out the fact that that's not the policy or have any relevance in this case.
Mr. Crawford, what can you tell us about your son that we haven't known about so far? And how has the family coped with all this? Investigation, the death in general, the more personal side as opposed to the legal matters?
It's tough, you know. Obviously, we're doing our best to cope. We're grounded by God, so we're doing our best to cope with the situation. But it's insulting in the sense that, you know, we have nailed and consistently have said that from the get-go that this was a conflict of interest by the Ohio Attorney General's office. And it was like it was falling on deaf ears. And as a result of that, as far as I'm concerned, that's why my son is not with me today.
But what do we know about your son that we don't know right now?
Pretty much to reiterate, he was your typical in most aspects, your typical 22-year-old young man, you know, trying to figure out this next step. In fact, we had discussed some issues of him furthering his education, you know, so he was a family man. He leaves behind 2 children, John H. Crawford IV and Jaden Crawford, who's 6 months. He's pretty laid back. Those who know him and know him well, you know, they would tell you that. He's a pretty laid back spirit. You know, he loved people, ironically, you know. He loved people. And he comes, I think we have a good family. You know, he comes from a good background. We're just ordinary people. We stress education, and I was glad to hear he told me in his own words that he was, you know, thinking about going back to school, and that was music to my ears because we were all on my end, college graduates, and so that's something that we believe in.
Mr. Crawford.
Will there be a civil suit? Will there be a civil suit, Mr. Wright?
At this point, we're weighing our options. What we are most concerned about is the indictment of these officers.
Mr. Crawford.
How does the community support help you and your family get through this tough time?
Oh, it's been absolutely phenomenal. We're eternally grateful. We truly are. We've had just a tremendous amount of support, and we're greatly appreciative. It does show and illustrate that there are some intelligent minds out there in the pursuit of justice. Because again, we're not anti-police. That's ridiculous. I worked under the umbrella myself, so that's not the issue here. We're just pro-justice. So I would like to reiterate that. I think a lot of our good people, they're pretty oratorically sound. We have Bishop over there, and certainly some more people who have pointed that out. We're not anti-cop, we're just pro-justice. We're just seeking justice for ourselves.
Mr. Crawford.
Yes, sir.
The way things have unfolded since August the 5th to now, I'm going to ask you a pointed question. Would you consider this a murder?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. I said that from day one, I believe. I said my son was murdered. After I saw the video, there's every indication of that. It is what it is. That is a fact. He was murdered. He had no chance in the situation, in the circumstances surrounding the situation. He had no chance, absolutely no chance. So yes, sir, to answer your question, he was murdered.
Could we discuss now the potential for a civil lawsuit and when?
And at this point, we're not in a position to discuss the civil lawsuit.
Because
We're waiting to gather all the evidence we can and all the information we can. Mr. Crawford wants his son's name vindicated. They have killed him again.
Thank you.
That's what's happening.
And that's the issue here. We're not, our primary objective here as a family is to prosecute. We're not concerned about the civil issue in terms of the suit, as far as the monetary issue right now. So let's be clear on that.
And we're still investigating. I mean, there are still lots of information that we don't have. We don't have the investigatory file from the Bureau, from BCI, so we're still gathering information. Once we have completed the gathering of information, then we will make a determination as to what will be the next step.
Any potential action towards the 911 caller?
And at this point, that's up to the prosecutor to determine whether or not what the 911 caller did in his call, whether or not that rises to the level of a criminal offense.
How much do you think the fact that this happened in Greene County was heard by a Greene County grand jury weighed into that? Would a jury say in a more diverse community of Montgomery County have different outcomes?
Well,
One of our concerns is, it's no secret, Mr. DeWine has a long history in Greene County. My understanding, he was county prosecutor, and prosecutors work hand in hand with the police officers. So you have to ask yourself in this case, does that long-term relationship, does that play a role in what happened in front of the grand jury? And I hope we get to find out someday.
I'm talking more about the makeup of the jury, though, the citizens that served that made this decision.
Go ahead, Sean.
You have to speak to the citizens of the grand jury about kind of whether their makeup made a determination. I would like to think that we live in a country and in a state where the makeup would not be a factor. But I say this, I think the presentation of the evidence played more in the role of whether someone indicted yesterday. Because I don't care whatever the makeup is of the grand jury, if you're not presented the evidence in a way that can get an indictment, it doesn't matter. And we always hear the joke, you can indict a ham sandwich, but you can't indict a police officer who shoots a man that's no threat. If you're not presenting the evidence, of course, if you're sitting up there telling them about training policies, procedures, if you're advocating like you're the defense lawyer for the police officers, I would think it would be difficult to get an indictment in Greene County, Montgomery County, or any county in this United States.
The prosecutor's supposed to introduce the evidence in a fair and impartial way. after you looked at the press conference online from the prosecutor, ask yourself, do you think he presented the evidence in a fair and impartial way? We're convinced he didn't. We weren't able to be there, but we're convinced he didn't.
Mr. Williams, what should the officers have done? You talk about, evaluation and how they needed more time to evaluate. Or any of you, you could know what steps you think they should have taken. They say they were calling out to Mr. Crawford.
Can I be as simple as possible and blunt? They should not have shot this man. There was no justification, no reason. There was no threat or harm to anyone, including the officers or anyone in that store. So to answer your question, they need to follow the Constitution. They need to follow the Supreme Court. They need to follow the morality and ethics that this state has set before this ever happened. So that's as simple as it can be.
Mr. Crawford,
There's an open carry.
To expound on something you said earlier, if I could, you said you want justice for your son. For you, what is that? How would you define that?
Justice is simply getting a conviction, on track, getting a conviction for the man who killed my son.
There's an open carry law in Ohio, is that not right?
That's right.
And with the open carry law in Ohio and no shots fired, so is this procedure to give a potential threat 2 seconds?
That's even more reason why they have the duty to evaluate the situation and not come in and shoot on sight.
Lethal force should not be the first option. They could have backed out of the situation. They could have given him time to respond. Okay? There's a lot of other things they should have done. They didn't do them. They didn't even consider them. They shot him on sight.
What about this so-called change in protocol that Mr. Piedmeyer indicated in the news conference yesterday in reference to, again, I go back to what I was asking earlier, this change since mass shooters, that seems to be something that police agencies are following.
I'm not familiar with agencies that's following what he described on that presentation. So I will be interested to see all the policies and procedures of Beaver Creek Police Department and make a determination. As we said, we're gonna look at the whole file and make sure that we look at what's the possible legal remedy. But I'll say this to you, notwithstanding any policy or procedure he talked about yesterday, the #1 policy and procedure that every officer needs to follow is only use deadly force if there's a threat of harm, immediate threat of harm to you or someone else. That didn't happen in this case.
That was the last question. We are going to conclude this press conference.
Thank you.